Hi, I'm Jacqui, and I work at Condé Nast International, where I'm head of interactives for Vogue in all of our 11 markets outside of the United States. I'm here at the media party to give a keynote called Chances and Challenges, where I will be talking about the last year and change that I've been part of this new team at Condé Nast International, tasked with rebooting and modernizing all of our titles, specifically starting with Vogue. It's good to be here. This is actually my second media party as well. I was here in 2013. And so when I was thinking about what I would come back here and talk to you about, it happened to coincide with my 1-year anniversary at my job. So I realized I could get up here and tell you step by step what we've been doing at my company, but that might be a little boring. So I thought maybe I could frame it in terms of chances and challenges, because the last year of my life has been full of both. I think whenever you start a new venture, you look at all the opportunities that it will afford you and the things you can do. And one of the things you don't always necessarily think about is how you're going to do it and what kind of obstacles you're going to run into. So that's what I'm going to talk about. But really quick background, never hurt anyone. So, like I said, this is my second media party, and I think the last time I was here, I was still working at the New York Times. That's me with the first edition of the International New York Times. But at the New York Times, I started as a news applications developer and ended up being an editor on the interactive news desk. And the interactive news desk was, or still is, a team that kind of bridges the gap between technology, the different news desks like international reporting and business, and graphics. It took up about half of the second floor of the newsroom. Some of the projects we worked on included several Olympic Games. That's me in London at the start of the Olympics. That area got super crowded really quick, but that was just right before they started. We also covered a lot of data journalism projects like presidential elections and midterm elections. One of the other things we did was set up the first editorial-focused analytics team in the newsroom. But after the New York Times, I moved to London, which is where I live now. I joined the BBC as a visual journalist. Primarily, my work was with the World Service, so I did a lot of reporting and coverage around sub-Saharan African issues, Middle East, and so forth. Another part of my job with penguins was doing outreach projects in areas that we wanted to grow our audience. So that was in Cape Town, that picture there, and that's where the penguins were. So we went to Cape Town and we worked with local people there to find out how we could better serve them. But coming back to what I'm here to talk to you about today, while I was at the BBC, I met one of my journalism heroes, Wolfgang Blau. He had just left The Guardian, where he was their director of strategy, to start a new venture. And while we were having coffee, he asked me very nonchalantly, if I were to start a team that was going to experiment with visual and new formats of storytelling, how would you do it? Like, how would you do it, Jacqui? So then we said goodbye, and I thought about it. And me being me, I wrote up 10 pages of notes on what I would do, because this was one of my journalism heroes, and he asked me a question. And then I worked very hard at editing it down to about 2 pages, because who's going to read 10 pages? And so I wrote it, and I sent it off to him. And me being me, I quoted Eleanor Roosevelt in it. Here, this is a quote from her talking about the flip side of freedom being responsibility. Me being me, I quoted Eleanor Roosevelt twice in this paper, and I sent it off to him. And then I didn't hear back for a little while. A few months later, I get a lunch invitation from Mr. Blau, and he offered me a job. So now I work for a company called Condé Nast International. They are owned by the same parent company as Condé Nast. They publish a variety of magazines, some of which I bet you've heard of. I just want to note that from here on out, some of the beautiful and possibly strange photography that will be in my slides comes from the pages of Vogue, one of our most successful. So, I mentioned Condé Nast and Condé Nast International being part of the same company. Condé Nast is what operates in the United States, and they publish a variety of titles, including The New Yorker, and some of the ones you can see up there. They also own Reddit, which is a very popular website, so I'm told, and Ars Technica, Pitchfork music site. Condé Nast International publishes some of the same titles, only they do so in every region except for the United States. Whether that's in wholly owned markets, where we control the publishing and the reporting, so from Russia to Mexico, China. Or we also have licensed markets as well, where some of our titles have been published going back to the 1950s. So in Australia, we have Vogue that's been published since the 1950s. We also have a variety of titles in Brazil and throughout Europe. So going back to Vogue, one of our most successful, or the most successful title that we publish, and it's also the oldest, one of the oldest, is Vogue. This here is from the cover of the very first issue of Vogue that was published in New York in 1892. Some things have changed a little bit. And as I said, I wanted to frame this talk, so that was your background. I wanted to frame it in terms of chances and challenges. I should also mention, of course, that I'm framing it from my own perspective as the incoming head of Interactives, now 1 year on, at a company that has never had such a team. So, I could talk about my job, but first, to give it some context, what is it that I'm trying to do? Well, reinvent Vogue, basically, is what we've been tasked to do. We published a lot of titles, but you can't really, it's very difficult to focus on all of them at once, so we're focusing with our most successful first, Vogue. Vogue, as some of you might know, is often referred to as the fashion Bible, or here in the New York Times, Caroline Weber refers to it as the world's most influential fashion magazine. So the first challenge with reinventing the world's most influential fashion magazine that's been published since the 1800s is time, right? When you are trying to change anything, you come up against whatever the legacy is. So we come up against over 125 years of publishing. And as you can see, over those years, it went from illustrated covers, it went through 2 world wars, changing norms in society, but always, always on fashion, right? The second challenge that we've run into is a focus on print. I think this is something that people have run into before in this industry, but what I've learned coming from the world of newspaper and broadcast journalism going into magazines is that the world of magazines hasn't really made the jump into digital as much as newspapers or even broadcast TV. This picture here is a picture, at least accurate, of last year of all of the editors-in-chief of Vogue in all our international markets. Some of them may be recognizable faces, some of them are even brands of their own right. However, I think few people could actually name any of the digital editors of Vogue. They haven't had movies, such as this one. Has many people seen The Devil Wears Prada? It's at least loosely based on Anna Wintour, who is the editor and now creative director of American Vogue and creative director of all of Condé Nast. So going back to the challenges with reinventing Vogue, whatever we do digitally, we have to do really, really well. Print Vogue is beautiful. The photographs are beautiful. It's about fashion. We have to do it really well because, as was recently revealed, this was revealed in Vogue in August, whatever we do is going to have to pass muster with Anna. It's going to have to achieve this 4-letter word, which means Anna Wintour okays this. So it's a pretty high bar. Another chance for me, coming from covering current affairs, election, politics, sports, terrorism, often in news, the topics we cover can be rather dark. It was the opportunity to work on something different, cover fashion. There's one challenge here, but for me, it's pretty major. What is fashion, and how does it work? I mean, with reporting, like, you'll often have to just become an overnight master of a topic. But for me, like, having to reinvent the most influential fashion magazine and do it well and get the AWOK, I need to get my head around how fashion works and, like, how is the industry structured? Who are the important designers? What are the important events and when do they happen? I started last August at Condé Nast International, and about a week later, New York Fashion Week started. There are 4 big fashion weeks that happen twice a year, September and February, so we're in the middle of it right now. I was asking, well, how do these shows even happen? Like, how does everyone know where to go? How do they decide, like, what designers show in New York versus London or Paris? And one of my more experienced colleagues started drawing it for me. So that's actually part from a much bigger diagram, just explaining this is when the planning starts, and this is how the reporters know where to go, and the photographers, and so on and so forth. Okay, so another opportunity was coming up with a strategy to coordinate our coverage for all of Vogue, and not only just Vogue, but all of our titles that cover fashion in some way, for the first time. So one of the things that I found most shocking upon starting my job was that Vogue's international digital editors had never even been in the same room as each other. They didn't speak, and I thought that was just really, really shocking, because they're all covering basically the same thing. They do it from their own local perspective, of course, but we're trying to reinvent it. And how can you even start talking about sharing technology or sharing things like agency contracts with photographers when all of these distributed editorial teams don't talk to each other? And again, coming from news background, where we have concepts like the continuous news desk or continuous news coverage, taking advantage of globally distributed bureaus to do round-the-clock reporting, I found it very shocking that Vogue didn't coordinate that. And relatedly, but I think this is an important point, they not only didn't talk to each other or share resources, they also, to some extent to this day, still view each other as competitors, which means Vogue Paris competes with Vogue Italy, which competes with Vogue Japan, which competes with British Vogue, and so on and so forth. And in my first couple of months, I set up these video chats with some of the digital editors, and a recurring theme was that they wanted to scoop not just their competing magazine titles, but they also wanted to scoop each other. So one of the questions that they would ask me when I proposed, oh, we could build a tool to help you cover the runway shows. Well, can you do it in a way that will let me beat out, Russian Vogue would want to beat out British Vogue, getting something on Facebook and so forth. And of course, I think this is true in any industry, but I found it, maybe this is just my own feeling, but in news and in digital news, cultural change is hard. We have a brand that's been around for over 100 years. What they're doing is working well for them in print. How do you convince them to change in digital as well? Old habits can die hard. I don't know what's going on there. So now we can go back to that original quote that I had up on the screen before from Eleanor Roosevelt and that job offer that I got. The job offer that I got from Mr. Blau. So I had no idea when I wrote that document and cut it down to 2 pages. I had no idea, first of all, that I was being entertained as a potential hire. And I also had no idea how much I would be living this quote, doing something that scares me almost every day. Starting a new team is scary. It's fun and rewarding, but it's also scary. But also, like, coming up with a way of collaborating with these editorial teams in Beijing and Moscow and Tokyo and London, around the block from where I work, but still, coming up with a way of collaborating with all of them is really hard as well, and it can be scary, especially when, I think it was my first or second day, it was definitely during my first week on the job, that I was speaking with Wolfgang, and he just kind of offhandedly mentioned that he was on the phone with Anna, and she was a little bit upset about hearing this head of interactive journalism had started. And I looked at him, I said, Anna who? Early days. He goes, Anna Wintour. I was like, she knows about me. Oh my gosh. I think we're fine now, but you know, it's just, it's scary, right? And it can be scary in ways that you don't even anticipate. Oh yeah, especially when that was my first day on the job. Wolfgang tweets that, you know, he's kind of set the bar pretty low for me. It can be intimidating, right? So, but with starting a team, I thought my biggest challenge from the start was going to be recruiting people. Because you have to find someone who has the right mix of skills, right? So you need someone who's visual, who can design, who can code, who can find stories, who can find ways of telling a story well. And, you know, in our industry, like I still hear this word bandied about that I'm not gonna say, that makes it sound like you're trying to rip these whimsical creatures from a fairy tale to hire them. But happily, and to my surprise, that was not the hardest part at all. I now have a team of 3 people. And yeah, so I thought that was going to be tough, finding people. What is really tough is managing people. Wearing so many hats, right? I think that publishing, writing stories, reporting, investigating, even designing, writing code to sort through stuff, setting up meetings, writing emails, that's a completely different set of skills than team leadership and vision and, you know, making sure that the people who work for you are happy and handling personalities and personality clashes, because there are always clashes, I found, when you have a group of talented, creative people who really care about what they do. When you have a bunch of those people together, there will often be clashes. So how do you handle that? So that's another thing that I just didn't really anticipate. I thought, oh yeah, I'll start this team. It'll be fun. It'll be great. We'll make some interactives and so on. So I guess I would say it's been a humbling experience. And I've had a lot of opportunities for both professional and personal growth. And maybe the most eye-opening thing for me that I certainly didn't anticipate was starting a new team at an organization that's never had such a team to reinvent something. I worked in newsrooms that had long established, for better or worse, chains of command, processes, and workflows for publishing and reporting. You know, we had pitching processes, we had sign-off processes, and I got to Condé Nast International, and we hadn't even hired anyone else for our editorial team. I was the first. And so it's an opportunity, yes, an opportunity to not repeat past mistakes, to try to get things right. But you still have to make up all of these processes and workflows. Everything for me, from writing a general pitch document that I could point people to internationally and say, this is why maybe you should do an interactive. How do you even pitch a project to China, right? Or even around the corner to British Vogue. So we had to come up with a format for the pitch, the who, what, why, when. A workflow, once we do pitch something, from the pitch phase through to internal reviews of it, how do we actually make it? And then how do we translate it? Some of our markets will publish in their native language, like Vogue Italia will publish in Italian, but they'll also publish in English. And what if China wants it as well? Then we have to get someone to translate it into Chinese, right? So how do we promote it on social media? Then also, once we publish it, how do we actually figure out, was that a success? Did it resonate? Why or why not? And finally, I thought this would be the heart of the matter for me. As head of interactives, I naturally want to make interactives. So another mixed chance and challenge is that in fashion, and I did so much research on this, just trying to find examples of new storytelling formats. For such a visual industry, I thought that there would be a lot. But what I found is it's very reliant on the traditional article and slideshows. If you know of any really interesting fashion interactives, please let me know. But it makes it hard because what does my team compare themselves to? Where is the bar that we have to surpass to reinvent Vogue, right? And then, of course, there's this question. I basically have an existential crisis weekly at work. What is an interactive? What do you do? And like, why should we care? Which is why I wrote that general pitch document. And then maybe I can start proposing ideas for stuff that we can make. But then final challenge is that I'm part of this team that I think I was maybe number 10 or 12 when I joined, and now we number over 100 people in London on this team. And they're not all making interactives. What they're doing is a bit of another existential crisis, right? Why do we exist? How do we reinvent Vogue? And then how do we roll that out to our other titles like Wired and GQ? And how do we make money? And so there's 3 of us on the interactives team. We have big ambitions, but we have to be very strategic as well about what we work on. And that's it for me, so thank you.